What happens when Hollywood legend Sylvester Stallone sits down for what should be a routine promotional interview, only to find himself under attack from a host who seems determined to tear him down? What you're about to witness is one of the most shocking live television moments ever captured, where a beloved action star reaches his breaking point and unleashes decades of frustration in front of millions of viewers. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this explosive confrontation. The morning started like any other at the View Studios in Manhattan. Sylvester Stallone had arrived early, his usual professional demeanor intact as he prepared for what his publicist had assured him would be a friendly chat about his latest project. The 70-something-year-old actor, still maintaining the physique that made him famous, sat in the green makeup chair as assistants buzzed around him, touching up his appearance for the cameras. "Mr. Stallone, we're so excited to have you on the show today," chirped one of the production assistants. "The ladies are really looking forward to talking with you about your new film and your incredible career." Stallone nodded politely, his gravelly voice barely audible as he responded, "Yeah, should be good. Always happy to talk about the work." But as the minutes ticked by and showtime approached, there was an energy in the air that felt different. Joy Behar had been particularly animated during the pre-show meeting, making comments to her co-hosts that seemed loaded with an edge that hadn't been there for other guests that week. "I've got some real questions for Rocky today," she had said with a smirk that her colleagues couldn't quite read. "It's time someone asked the tough stuff instead of just letting these guys coast on their old movies." When the cameras started rolling and the familiar View theme music filled the studio, everything appeared normal. The co-hosts took their positions around the iconic table, with Joy Behar settling into her spot with what looked like a folder full of notes, far more preparation than she usually brought to celebrity interviews. "Welcome back to The View," Joy announced to the cameras, her television smile perfectly in place. "We're here with the one and only Sylvester Stallone, star of Rocky, Rambo, and countless other action films that have entertained audiences for decades. Sly, welcome to the show." Stallone leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him on the table. "Thanks for having me, Joy. Great to be here with all you ladies. So let's talk about your new project," Joy began, but there was something in her tone that the other hosts immediately picked up on. It wasn't the warm, conversational approach she typically used with guests. "You're still making action movies at your age. Don't you think it's time to maybe step aside and let younger actors take over these roles?" The question hit the table like a cold splash of water. Even Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while Sarah Haynes shot a quick glance at the producers off-camera. This wasn't the line of questioning they had discussed in the pre-show meeting. Stallone's expression remained composed, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. "Well, Joy, I think as long as audiences want to see the stories and I'm physically capable of telling them, age is just a number. I mean, Clint Eastwood was still making westerns well into his 80s. But Clint Eastwood is Clint Eastwood," Joy fired back, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "And let's be honest, your recent films haven't exactly been setting the box office on fire. Isn't this more about ego than actual audience demand?" The studio audience, which had been warmly applauding just moments before, fell into an uncomfortable silence. Stallone's jaw tensed slightly, but he maintained his professional composure. "I think the numbers speak for themselves," he replied evenly. "The Expendables franchise has been successful. Creed revitalized Rocky for a new generation, and people still connect with these characters. I'm not making movies for ego. I'm making them because there are stories worth telling." Joy wasn't backing down. She flipped through her notes dramatically, as if she had been preparing for this moment for weeks. "Speaking of Creed, wasn't that really Michael B. Jordan's movie? I mean, you were basically just there for nostalgia value, right? Playing the same character you created 40 years ago?" "Joy," Whoopi interjected gently, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "I think what we're all curious about is how Sly keeps himself in such incredible shape for these demanding roles." But Joy wasn't interested in changing direction. She had locked onto her target, and something in her demeanor suggested this had become personal, though no one in the studio could understand why. "No, I want to hear his thoughts on this," Joy continued, completely ignoring Whoopi's attempted intervention. "Because it seems to me like Hollywood has this problem with aging male stars who just can't accept that their time has passed. They keep coming back to the same well over and over again instead of making room for fresh talent. Stallone's hands, still clasped on the table, tightened slightly. His voice remained controlled, but there was a new quality to it that regular viewers of The View had never heard before. Joy, I'm not sure what you're getting at here, but I've spent 5 decades building characters that mean something to people. Rocky Balboa isn't just a movie character to a lot of folks. He's a symbol of perseverance and fighting against the odds. If that resonates with audiences, then I don't see why I should apologize for continuing to tell those stories. But isn't it really about the money? Joy pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension around the table. I mean, these franchises are cash cows, and you're just milking them for every dollar you can get, regardless of whether the stories are actually worth telling anymore. The other co-hosts were now exchanging worried glances. This was not the direction anyone had expected the interview to take, and the production staff behind the cameras were clearly scrambling to figure out how to handle what was rapidly becoming a hostile interrogation rather than a promotional interview. Stallone took a deep breath, his decades of media training kicking in as he tried to navigate what had become an increasingly uncomfortable situation. Look, Joy, I understand that everyone's entitled to their opinion about movies and careers and all of that. But I think you might be underestimating what these characters mean to people and why they continue to connect with audiences across generations. Do they, though? Joy shot back immediately. Or is it just Hollywood's old boys club protecting each other in green lighting projects because of who you know rather than the quality of the material? The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Stallone's expression changed noticeably. For the first time since the interview began, the professional mask slipped just slightly, revealing a flash of something much deeper and more intense. Excuse me? Stallone's voice dropped to a lower register, the kind of tone that had made him famous for playing tough guys who didn't back down from a fight. What exactly are you implying, Joy? Joy seemed to sense she had struck a nerve, and instead of pulling back, she leaned forward with what could only be described as predatory satisfaction. I'm not implying anything, Sly. I'm saying it outright. Hollywood is a business built on relationships and favors. And actors like you have been benefiting from that system for decades, while newer, more diverse talent gets pushed aside. The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes was staring down at her notes, clearly wishing she could disappear, while Alyssa Farah Griffin kept glancing toward the producers with an expression that screamed for help. Even the usually unflappable Whoopi Goldberg looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Joy, maybe we should move on to talking about Sly's philanthropy work, Whoopi suggested, her voice carrying a warning tone that Joy seemed determined to ignore. No, I think this is important, Joy continued, her voice rising slightly. We talk all the time on this show about representation and giving opportunities to underrepresented groups, but then we celebrate actors who keep taking up space that could go to someone else. Stallone's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the cameras caught something that viewers would replay countless times in the coming weeks. It was the look of a man who had spent his entire career being underestimated, who had clawed his way up from nothing, and who was not about to sit quietly while someone questioned his right to exist in his own industry. Let me tell you something, Joy, Stallone began, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of barely controlled intensity. I didn't get handed anything in this business. I wrote Rocky because nobody would give me a shot. I sold my dog to pay rent while I was trying to get that script made. When the studios wanted to buy it, they wanted to cast somebody else, somebody more established, somebody who fit their idea of what a leading man should look like. But that was 50 years ago, Joy interrupted, seemingly unable to read the warning signs that were obvious to everyone else in the room. What have you done lately besides recycle the same character over and over? The studio audience was dead silent now. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Stallone's hands unclenched from the table, and he leaned back in his chair, his posture changing from defensive to something much more dangerous. What have I done lately? I've created opportunities for dozens of actors through the Expendables franchise. I've mentored young directors and writers. I've used my platform to tell stories about working-class heroes and underdogs who refuse to give up. All starring you, of course. Joy shot back with a laugh that sounded more like a bark. How convenient that all these opportunities for others just happen to revolve around keeping Sylvester Stallone in the spotlight. That was the moment. Anyone watching could see it in Stallone's face. The exact instant when decades of frustration and a lifetime of fighting for respect crystallized into something explosive. His voice, when he spoke again, was quiet but filled with a fury that made the entire studio feel smaller. You know what, Joy? I've been sitting here trying to be polite, trying to play the game. But I think you've got some kind of personal problem with me that has nothing to do with movies or representation or any of the high-minded principles you're pretending to care about. Joy's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting Stallone to push back so directly. I don't have a personal problem with you. I'm just asking the questions that need to be asked. No, Stallone said, his voice growing stronger. You're not asking questions, you're making accusations. You're sitting there acting like I'm some kind of relic who should just disappear so you can feel better about whatever agenda you're pushing this week. I don't have an agenda, Joy protested, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Really? Stallone leaned forward again, his intense stare fixed directly on Joy. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've got a problem with successful people who came from nothing and built something lasting. It sounds like you think anybody who's been around for more than 5 minutes should just step aside and make room for whoever you think deserves it more. The tension in the studio was now so thick it was practically visible. The other co-hosts had given up any pretense of participating in the conversation and were simply watching in stunned silence as two strong personalities collided in real time. That's not what I said, Joy replied, but her voice was defensive now, lacking the aggressive confidence she had displayed just minutes earlier. It's exactly what you said, Stallone fired back. You question my right to make movies. You question my motives. You suggested I'm somehow taking opportunities away from other people by continuing to work in an industry I helped build. And you did it all with this smug attitude like you're some kind of moral authority on who deserves success and who doesn't. Joy tried to regain control of the conversation, straightening in her chair and attempting to return to her earlier confrontational tone. Look, Sly. I think you're being a little oversensitive here. I'm just pointing out that Hollywood has a diversity problem, and maybe actors of your generation need to step back and make room for fresh voices. But Stallone was no longer interested in playing defense. Something had shifted in his demeanor, and the cameras were capturing every second of what was clearly becoming a defining moment in television history. Oversensitive? He repeated, his voice rising for the first time. Let me tell you about oversensitive, Joy. Oversensitive is when someone uses a television platform to attack a guest who came here to talk about their work and instead gets ambushed with personal attacks disguised as social commentary. They're not personal attacks, Joy insisted, but she was clearly rattled now. Then what would you call it? Stallone demanded. Because you've spent the last 10 minutes telling me I'm too old, I'm greedy, I'm taking opportunities away from more deserving people, and I'm part of some systemic problem in Hollywood. If that's not personal, then I'd hate to see what you consider crossing the line. The studio audience was completely silent, mesmerized by what they were witnessing. This wasn't the usual celebrity interview where everyone smiled and promoted their latest project. This was raw, unfiltered confrontation between two people who clearly had very different views of the world. Joy seemed to realize that she had pushed too far. But instead of backing down, she doubled down with an approach that would prove to be a massive miscalculation. Look, Sly, Joy said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Maybe this is just what happens when people get older and more sensitive. You can't handle a little criticism like you used to. Maybe that's another sign that it's time to step back. The words hit the studio like a lightning strike. The other co-hosts actually recoiled in their chairs, and even the camera operators seemed to take a step back. Joy had just crossed a line that everyone in the room knew would have consequences. Stallone went completely still for a moment, his face cycling through a range of emotions that decades of acting experience couldn't mask. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. Did you just call me old and weak on national television? Joy, perhaps realizing she had gone too far but unable to find a graceful way out, attempted a laugh that came out hollow and forced. I'm just saying that maybe you're not taking constructive criticism as well as you used to. That was it. The dam burst. Stallone erupted from his chair with a speed that belied his years, his hands slamming down on the table with a sound that echoed through the studio like a gunshot. His voice, when it came, was the roar of someone who had finally reached his breaking point. Constructive criticism? Are you kidding me right now? You think what you've been doing for the last 15 minutes is constructive criticism? The studio audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row actually jumped in their seats. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what would become one of the most watched clips in television history. Joy, you want to talk about age and sensitivity? Let me tell you something about age. I'm 77 years old, and I've been in this business since before you knew what a television camera was. I've taken more real criticism, more real rejection, more real hits than you could imagine in your worst nightmares. Joy tried to interrupt, but Stallone wasn't having it. No, no, no. You had your 15 minutes to tear me down. Now you're going to sit there and listen while I tell you exactly what I think about your so-called journalism. The other hosts were frozen in place, uncertain whether to try to intervene or simply let this play out. Whoopi had her hand halfway to her earpiece, clearly getting frantic instructions from the control room. But even she seemed paralyzed by the intensity of the moment. You want to know about taking opportunities away from people? Stallone continued, his voice building to a crescendo. What about the opportunity you just took away from your viewers to actually learn something interesting about filmmaking, about storytelling, about what it takes to create characters that last for generations? Instead, you turned this into some kind of personal attack disguised as social justice. Sly, I think you need to calm down, Joy said, but her voice was shaking now. Calm down? Stallone's laugh was bitter and sharp. You spend 20 minutes trying to humiliate me on live television, questioning my integrity, my work ethic, my right to exist in my own industry, and then you tell me to calm down? Who do you think you are? The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Even the production staff behind the scenes had stopped moving, transfixed by what they were witnessing. I've been Rocky Balboa for 50 years, Stallone continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of his frustration. Do you know what that means? It means 50 years of people telling me I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't the right type. 50 years of proving them wrong. And now you sit there, in your comfortable chair, with your comfortable job, and you think you can just dismiss all of that because it fits your narrative? Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Stallone held up a hand that stopped her cold. You want to talk about diversity and representation? Fine. Let's talk about it honestly. When I wrote Rocky, I was a struggling actor from Philadelphia who couldn't get arrested in this town. The studios wanted to buy my script and cast a big-name actor. I said no. I fought for 2 years to play the character I created, and they told me I was crazy, that I'd never work again if I didn't take their deal. His voice was building again, fueled by decades of stored emotion. But I believed in that character, and I believed that working-class people deserve to see themselves as heroes on screen. That's diversity, Joy. That's representation. Rocky Balboa wasn't some privileged pretty boy. He was a bum from South Philly who refused to stay down when life knocked him flat. But that was then. Joy managed to interject weakly. No, that's now. Stallone exploded. That's every day. You think because I've been successful I've forgotten where I came from? You think I don't understand what it's like to be counted out? To be told you don't belong? To have people like you sitting in judgment of whether you deserve the opportunities you've worked your entire life to earn? The cameras captured everything. The raw emotion, the genuine hurt beneath the anger, the sight of a Hollywood legend stripped of all pretense and fighting for his dignity in real time. And you know what the really sad part is, Joy? You had a chance today to have a real conversation about storytelling, about perseverance, about what it takes to create something that lasts. Instead, you chose to use your platform to tear someone down. That says a lot more about you than it does about me. Stallone straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera, addressing the viewers at home. To everyone watching, I came here today to talk about work I'm passionate about, stories I believe in, and characters that have meant something to people for generations. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who seems to think that success is something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. He turned back to Joy, his voice now cold and controlled. You want to know about making room for new talent? I've produced dozens of actors, directors, and writers who got their first big breaks working with me. I've used my influence to greenlight projects that studios wouldn't touch. I've spent my own money developing young talent because I believe in giving people chances." Joy sat in stunned silence, clearly realizing that she had completely misjudged both her target and her audience. "But apparently, none of that matters to you," Stallone continued. "What matters is that you get to play the role of the righteous crusader, tearing down the establishment, even if that establishment is just a guy who came from nothing and worked his tail off to build something meaningful." He stood up and removed his microphone with deliberate precision. "I'm done here. This isn't journalism, it's ambush television, and I don't have to sit here and take it." As Stallone walked off the set, the studio remained in shocked silence. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Joy's stunned expression and the obvious discomfort of the other hosts. What had started as a routine promotional interview had become something much bigger, a moment that would be analyzed and debated for years to come. And for those few explosive minutes, viewers had witnessed something rarely seen on television: the complete and total dismantling of a host by a guest who had finally had enough. If you enjoyed this incredible story of what happens when politeness meets its breaking point, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Do you think Joy Behar crossed the line? Or was Stallone overreacting to legitimate questions?